Part 27. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 261. Chapter 261 Departing for the race course. At the very least, my grandfather, brother, and mother are all still alive, and that is enough. Suya thought that Sulayun was thinking of the past, and a haze appeared in his eyes. But he quickly disappeared. Suya sent Sulayun back to the yard and returned to his room himself. Young master. King Guya was waiting aside, changing Suya's clothes. The water has been boiled. You can take a bath first. Suya nodded slightly and paused in his movements. Is there any news about that couple? The U Tower hasn't sent anyone yet, so they probably haven't found it yet. I know, you go down and have a rest, you've been tired for a long day too. King Guya hesitated for a moment, but seeing Suya's calm expression, he did not refuse. That subordinate will go back first. Suya only washed his body briefly, and as soon as he walked out of the screen, the tips of his ears twitched slightly. Who? Master Su. Lu Feng came out of the corner with a letter in his hand. How did you come? Suya asked in surprise and put on his coat. Lai Yufeng handed the letter forward. My master asked me to bring this to you. Suya has seen the letter, and when he looked again, Lai Yufeng had left. He sat at the table and opened the letter. After only a few glances, his face turned ugly. The letter was also crumpled by him and dropped on the table. After a while, Suya picked up the letter again, smoothed out the wrinkles, and looked at it carefully. That's crazy. He whispered, stood up, grinned at it, took another piece of paper, and wrote something on it. The candlelight flickered, and there was silence inside and outside the house. Only the rustling sound of writing was blown out of the house by the wind and gradually drifted into the distance. Early in the morning, Kualayu brought a message. Sulayun was in front of the dressing mirror, Lian Xian combing her hair. Miss, I heard that Mr. Li Rui fell into a coma yesterday and did not wake up all day. There are many doctors going to the Li family now. As Kualayu said this, she took out the hairpin and handed it to Lian Xian. Mama Zhang heard this when she came in and glanced at Kualayu. Girl, don't say anything to the young lady. Then something happened to the young master of the Li family, and it has nothing to do with our young lady. Li Rui and Su Weiner are not well received by their ladies. What is there to say? This slave was quick to speak and said the wrong thing. Kualayu hurriedly knelt down, feeling a little annoyed. Sulayun smiled and said, Mommy, Kualayu also saw that I was bored and told me something. Get up quickly. Kualayu glanced at Sulayun first, then at Nanny Zhang, and then stood up. She knew that the young lady was not angry, and she thought that the young lady would be happy with the news, so she spoke quickly. Looking at the bronze mirror, Sulayun frowned slightly. What happened to Li Rui? Miss, did it hurt you? Lian Xian asked, thinking she had accidentally pulled Sulayun's hair. Sulayun shook his head. It's okay. After staying in the room for a while, Sulayun always felt uncomfortable, so he got up and walked out. Kui Lu and Lian Xian followed behind. After walking around aimlessly, Sulayun heard a sound not far away. Going over and taking a look, Sun Yuxuan was holding a wooden sword and practicing with Suya in a decent manner. Hearing someone approaching, Sun Yuxuan looked sideways with a smile on his face. Sister Leun. Suya finished practicing a set of sword moves, put the sword back, and then looked at Sulayun. Why did you come out so early in the morning? Sulayun stepped forward and handed over the handkerchief. When you wake up, come out for a walk, you'll be fine in the house anyway. Suya took the handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Sister Leun, my brother is teaching me swordsmanship, do you want to watch? Sun Yuxuan seemed to be waiting for someone who could appreciate his performance, and he immediately became excited. Seeing his cheeks turning red and his eagerness to try, Sulayun and Suya looked at each other and both smiled. Okay, sister, I'll appreciate it. Sulayun sat down on the side, and Sun Yukshuan stood up, the wooden sword in his hand facing the wind. Although he is not very old, he can wield a wooden sword with crisp and neat movements. Sun Yukshuan's eyes are firm, and every move he makes shows the demeanor of a general. After finishing a set, Sun Yukshuan put away his wooden sword and looked at Sulayun expectantly. Sulayun pulled him to his side, wiping the sweat from his forehead and saying, although sister doesn't know much about these things, I have seen brother Suya make gestures. Xiaoxian, you are so quick to make gestures like this, let's go to brother Suya. Really? Sun Yukshuan's eyes lit up, with uncontrollable joy on his face. Seeing him doing this, Suya started to joke. She inserted the sword in her hand into the scabbard and said, your sister is just trying to make you happy. Ah! Sun Yukshuan's voice was a bit disappointed. Sulayun was angry and funny. He patted Sun Yukshuan and said, don't listen to your brother Suya. Has my sister ever lied to you? No. Sun Yukshuan thought for a while and shook his head heavily. Then he looked at Suya and saw that Suya's face was full of smiles. Although he was still young, he reacted quickly. Brother Suya, you are kidding me. The child was angry for a moment. When Suya said that he would take him to ride a horse, Sun Yukshuan immediately lost his anger. Just after lunch, he dragged Suya and asked, brother Suya, when are we going to ride horses? We will go as soon as you wake up after your lunch break. Then Xiaoxian won't rest, let's go now. Looking at his eager look, Suya and Sulayun looked at each other and smiled. Qinzian stepped forward and grabbed him, if you don't rest, your brothers and sisters will have to rest. Xiaoxian doesn't want to fall asleep on the horse for a while. Once you have had enough rest, you can go to the race course. Sulayun squatted down and said. Seeing this, Sun Yukshuan could only nod his head and was taken back to the house to rest by the maid. After they had rested enough, Suya and Sulayun had just walked to the door when they saw Sun Yukshuan running out of the house without even putting on his clothes. The maid chased him all the way and finally caught up. Are we about to leave? Sun Yukshuan's collar was held by the maid, but his head was still facing Suya and Sulayun. We'll leave after you get dressed. Suya returned. Qinzian and Sun Gro did not go together. Firstly, they did not like riding horses. Secondly, they were preparing for the marriage of Sun Changping and Zhang Susu, so naturally they were too lazy to waste time on these matters. So the only people who went out were Sulayun, Suya and Sun Yukshuan. Suya was riding a horse in front, while Sulayun and Sun Yukshuan were sitting on the carriage. Sun Yukshuan poked his head out from time to look at Suya on the horse, his eyes full of anticipation. He also rode horses in the northwest, but he hasn't ridden for a while since he came back. Now that Suya can take him riding when he comes back, Sun Yukshuan is naturally happy. Sister Layun, can you ride a horse? Sun Yukshuan turned to look at Sulayun and asked. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 262. Chapter 262 White Horse is pregnant. Sulayun shook her head. She had never ridden a horse. When she was in Jingzhou, poor people naturally had no access to horses. When she returned to the capital, she was confined to her house and had no chance to ride a horse. Then Xiaoxian will teach my sister later. Sun Yukshuan patted his chest with the palm of his hand, feeling confident. Sulayun looked at his fleshy cheeks and couldn't help but stretched out his hand to pinch it gently. I'll be in trouble for brother Xiaoxian in a while. At the race course, Suya took Sulayun and Sun Yukshuan to choose horses. As soon as the horseman saw Suya, he immediately came up to meet him. General Su, we have recently acquired a few new horses, would you like to take a look? Is there a tamer mare? Suya looked around, but didn't like it. The groom hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, please come here, General Su." Following the groom to another area, at first glance, the horses inside were much more expensive than the ones just now. One of the pure white horses caught Suleun's attention first. Suye saw Suleun staring at the horse and asked, "Come closer and take a look." Suleun nodded, followed Suye, and got closer to the horse. Seeing this scene, the groom immediately introduced him, "General Su, this horse looks good on the outside, but it's actually a strong horse. If this young lady wants to ride it, I'd better choose another horse. After all, if the distinguished guest is injured, he cannot bear the responsibility." Suleun met Baima's eyes and slowly stretched out his hand to get closer. Until the palm of my hand fell on the white horse had not lost anything. The groom couldn't help but let out a sigh. Although this horse was a mare, it had a really strong temper. When it first came, it injured several people here. It has finally become docile in the past few days, but if anyone comes close, he still spits at people. Why did I feel more at ease when I saw this young lady? It seems that this young lady has a close affinity with this horse. Hey, bring that horse over and show it to the princess. As soon as the groom's voice fell, a delicate voice rang out. Suleun recognized the person as soon as he heard it. He turned around and saw that it was indeed Princess Yongping. Princess Yongping saw Suleun and snorted. It was obvious that she had seen Suleun, so she made a deliberate noise. The groom is in a dilemma. One is a guest brought by General Su Xiao, and the other is the favored Princess Yongping. How should he choose? Suleun put down his hand and said to Suye, "Brother, let's choose another one." She didn't want to have more arguments with Princess Yongping, especially when the Queen Mother's birthday banquet was approaching. Suye saw what she meant and said to the groom, "Give this horse to Princess Yongping." "Okay." The groom breathed a sigh of relief and stepped forward to lead the white horse. But just a few steps closer to Princess Yongping, the white horse kicked its hooves and snorted, looking impatient. Princess Yongping has always wanted what she wants since she was a child. Seeing Baima acting like this, her temper got worse. "Step forward directly, pull the reins, and jump up. Princess, be careful." The guards on the side rushed forward to take care of her, fearing that Princess Yongping would be injured. The white horse became more and more restless. Princess Yongping tightened the reins and said, "You all get out of the way." The guards did not dare to stay too far away and could only take a few steps back. Unexpectedly, the next moment, an accident happened. Princess Yongping flicked her whip in an attempt to subdue the white horse. Just as the whip was applied, the white horse became more and more irritable. It stuck out its hooves and started running at a long pace. While running, the white horse swayed, as if it wanted to throw off the person on its back. Princess Yongping's face suddenly turned pale, and she could only pull the reins tightly in an attempt to make the white horse stop. "Princess!" The guards rushed to catch up, but did not dare to get close. The white horse is naturally not as good as the stallion in terms of size, but its forehooves look particularly powerful. In addition, Princess Yongping is sitting on it. If something goes wrong and Princess Yongping is injured, even 10 of their heads will not be enough. The speed became faster and faster. Princess Yongping could no longer hold on and shouted, "Help!" The white horse rushed out of the stable and ran to the grassland not far away. "Leun, Xiaoxian, wait here." Suye frowned, grabbed the horse, flew on it, and ran in the direction of Princess Yongping. "If something happens to Princess Yongping, I'm afraid this race course will also be destroyed." Suleun pulled Sun Yuxuan to his side and looked worriedly in the direction where Suye was going. Fortunately, Suye's riding skills were superb and he caught up with Princess Yongping in no time. In Suleun's sight, Suye jumped up on the horse and fell behind Princess Yongping in a blink of an eye. He held the reins with one hand and supported Princess Yongping with the other to prevent her from falling. Probably there is one more person and it is heavier. The white horse's pace slowed down a bit, but it was still running without a clue. Suye could only hold the reins and force the white horse to run to safety. After about 2 circles, the white horse gradually calmed down. By the time they reached the stable, the white horse had stopped. The guard stepped forward to support Princess Yongping. As soon as she got off her horse, Princess Yongping's feet became weak and she almost lost her balance. Suleun stepped forward and said, "Brother, are you okay?" "Fine." Suye shook his head, but Suleun noticed a few scratches on the back of his hand, as if they were scratched with fingernails. The white horse moved a few more times and leaned towards Suleun. Suye was startled and wanted to hold the horse, but Suleun stopped him. "Brother, there seems to be something wrong with this horse." Suleun frowned and approached the white horse cautiously. He looked carefully. When he thought of something, his eyes flashed and he reached under the white horse. Sure enough. She looked at the groom and asked, "Was this white horse placed with the stallion on its way here?" "Of course yes, it will cost a lot if you send them separately." The groom rubbed his hands and felt happy in his heart. "Fortunately, General Su is here. This mare should be pregnant." "Ah!" The groom was startled, not expecting to hear such words. He hurriedly stepped forward, like Suleun, and reached under the white horse, but the white horse ducked back and avoided it. Suleun stroked the horse's head and patted it gently. "It's okay. He is just checking you." The gesture seemed to have an effect. The groom reached out again, but the white horse did not resist. Feeling the undulating belly, the groom was convinced that the white horse was really pregnant. She must have not been pregnant before she was sent here, and such things rarely happened on the way, so he didn't pay much attention to it. In addition, the white horse resisted people approaching, so he had no way to notice it. No wonder the white horse was so grumpy when it arrived. The groom sighed. Over there, Princess Yongping had calmed down. When she saw the white horse, she became angry and walked to the groom in a few steps. "Why do you keep such a dangerous horse? Come on, give this horse to the master of this county." End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 263. Chapter 263 Give a Face. When the guards heard the order, of course they would not hesitate and stepped forward to lead the white horse out. The groom stopped him in a panic and said, "Princess, this white horse is already pregnant and cannot be killed. He bought this horse at a good price. Now he is pregnant. It would be a great loss if he killed him." But when he met the eyes of Princess Yongping and the guards, the groom closed his mouth again and did not dare to say anything. "Sister, are they really going to kill this horse?" Sun Yuxuan leaned next to Suleun and gently tugged at the hem of her skirt, his eyes filled with worry. Suleun frowned slightly, but when he saw the guards stepping forward, he finally took a step forward. "Princess Yongping, you are not injured, why not let this horse go? Why should I listen to you?" Princess Yongping looked at Suleun angrily, and she still has lingering fears. She found it difficult to vent her hatred just by killing the horse. Suye said in a deep voice, "Princess, if you hadn't insisted on getting on the horse, this wouldn't have happened. The horse is still pregnant. Although it is just a beast, it is also a mother, and it is also to protect itself. That's why the child is like this. I hope the princess has a good life and lets it go." Facing Suye's calm face, Princess Yongping couldn't help but think of the scene where she was held in his arms just now. Having seen Prince Jin since she was a child, her heart fell on him and she never noticed other people. "This is the first time I have such close contact with a man," Princess Yongping thought, her cheeks gradually turned red. Her mouth moved slightly and her voice became much softer. Since you said that, I will give you some face, after all, you just saved me. Thank you, Princess. Suye cupped his hands and thanked him, with a slight smile on his lips. Seeing that smiling face, Princess Yongping felt her heart beating wildly. She forced herself to raise her chin. This race course is very boring. You can play slowly. She was about to leave with her guards when she turned around and saw a group of people walking not far away. The leaders are Xiao Shenjiao and Princess Anil. Princess Yongping then remembered that she came to the race course today just because she heard that King Jin was also coming. For a moment, she stopped where she was, not knowing whether to go or not. Seeing Xiao Shenjiao and Princess Anil approaching, Suye stepped forward to greet them. His Royal Highness the King of Jin, Princess Anil. Suleun pulled Sun Yuxuan forward to greet them. Princess Anil saw Suleun and Sun Yuxuan with a smile on her face. She stepped forward and took Suleun's arm affectionately. Leun, I haven't seen you for a while. Who is this? She pointed to Sun Yuxuan. Sun Yuxuan didn't recognize the situation and even bowed obediently. Xiaoxian has met Princess Anil. Xiaoxian is the child of the second aunt of a folk girl. Suleun introduced. Princess Anil nodded. It turns out he is the son of General Sun Er. By the way, are you here to ride horses too? Why not come together? It's good that Princess Anil doesn't mind. The groom brought a few more horses over for several people to choose from. Suleun originally had her eye on one, but before she could step forward, the white horse from before came pacing over and nuzzled her gently, as if letting her choose him. Suleun was a little worried thinking that the white horse was pregnant, but the groom said that a little exercise would not harm the horse. Therefore, Suleun got on the back of the white horse. The white horse has a nice name, it's called Snow. Riding on the horse, Suleun felt the shaking on his body and couldn't help but tighten his legs, feeling a little nervous. Looking around again, Sun Yuxuan was already on horseback and ran some distance away. Hasn't Leun ever ridden a horse? Princess Anil got dressed and sat on the horse with clean and neat movements. Suleun smiled helplessly. It's true that a folk girl has never ridden a horse. Princess, let's go first. Okay, then you should pay attention to yourself. After Princess Anil said this, she swung the reins, clamped her legs, and the horse under her spread its hooves and ran out. Beside, Princess Yongping asked someone to fetch the horse she used to ride. She got on it as soon as she turned over. Before running out, she even gave Suleun a faint disdain. Suleun didn't notice her behavior at all. Qilayu had learned how to ride, so he held the reins for Suleun and walked towards the grass. Huangxiu was very docile under Suleun's body, and Suleun gradually relaxed. Miss, would you like to try it yourself? Qilayu saw that Suleun was a little eager to give it a try, so he suggested it. Suleun was indeed moved. After hearing this, he hesitated and agreed. Taking the reins from Qilayu, Suleun gently stroked Huangxiu's hair and said softly, Huangxiu, you have to be good. Huangxiu snorted, as if in response to Suleun. Holding the reins, Suleun walked slowly on the grass. The sound of wind in my ears, the sound of treetops, and the fragrance of early spring are in my nose. Suleun temporarily forgot where he was, and the hand holding the reins gradually loosened his grip. Sister Leun. Sun Yuxuan's childish voice broke Suleun's contemplation. She came back to her senses and subconsciously tightened the reins. Looking sideways, Sun Yuxuan was riding on a smaller horse, followed not far behind by Suye and Xiao Shenjiao. Perhaps he was worried about Sun Yuxuan's safety, so Suye didn't leave too far. The two of them were sitting on horseback, talking about something unknown. Sister Leun, don't let go of the reins casually, it's very dangerous. Sun Yuxuan saw Suleun's movements, so he stopped his horse and shouted. Suleun also knew that he had just been distracted, and felt a little guilty. He didn't expect to ask Xiaoxian to remind him. After walking around the racecourse a few more times, the weather gradually became darker. Yun'er, Xiaoxian, His Highness King Jin and I still have some things to discuss. You two should be careful on the way back when you go back. Suye picked up Suleun from the horse, and Sun Yuxuan was also picked up by Kui Lu. Brother, go ahead, we'll be fine. Let the flowing wind send them back. Xiao Shenjiao opened his mouth. Suleun's eyes flashed. This was the first sentence she heard the other party say today. Your Highness, you don't have to be like this. Brother Shenjiao, what are you going to do? Can I follow you? Princess Yongping hurried over and stood next to Xiao Shenjiao, asking shyly. Being interrupted, Suleun nodded to Suye and took Sun Yuxuan away first. Behind him, Princess Yongping was still pestering Xiao Shenjiao. Xiao Shenjiao took a step back and said, You and Yu'er should go back to the palace together. Before Princess Yongping could say anything more, Xiao Shenjiao took Lai Yufeng and left with Suye. Princess Anil looked at Princess Yongping's annoyed look and shook her head lightly. Yongping still didn't give up on her brother, but she didn't understand that no matter what the reason, her brother couldn't marry her. Mingzhu, go back. Princess Anil is Xiao Shenjiao's biological sister. When facing her, Princess Yongping did not dare to be arrogant and could only reluctantly walk away. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 264. Chapter 264 Masked Man. The small courtyard has been particularly lively these days. Qin Jiu once again saw off a group of guests and was about to take a rest when the courtyard door rang again. Madam, let me do it. Zhou Mingsheng felt sorry for Qin Jiu being so busy these days, so he quickly grabbed her and ran to open the door himself. Seeing the people outside the house, Zhou Mingsheng looked surprised. Miss Su, why are you here? He quickly welcomed Suleun into the courtyard. Qin Jiu heard the commotion and came out to take a look. Her expression suddenly changed. Ms. Su, come in quickly. The couple pulled Suleun into the house. The interior had been greatly changed, with many decorations put on it. Suleun looked around and saw that it was still a bit crowded. It seems that you are really busy these days. It's okay, it's okay. We should have gone to Sun's house in person to say thank you to Miss Su. How can we get Miss Su to come in person? Qin Jiu served the tea and stood aside with Zhou Mingsheng. Both of them looked a little embarrassed. Why are you standing? Sit down quickly. I had wanted to come when I learned about Mr. Zhou's high school that day. I just thought that you would have to entertain a lot of people these days, so I postponed coming for a few days. I hope you can do not mind. Suleun glanced at Lian Xian and Kuliu, and the two of them stepped forward and handed out what they had in their hands. Some congratulatory gifts, I hope you don't dislike them. Qin Jiu quickly waved her hand. Miss Su, how could we accept your gift? If it weren't for you, Ashen might not be able to attend the spring festival, let alone go to high school. Zhou Mingsheng said nothing, but his expression showed that he completely agreed with Qin Jiu's words. Why don't you take a look first and then talk? Suleun laughed, and Lian Xian opened the small box. There were some banknotes and a land deed inside. Qin Jiu and Zhou Mingsheng looked at each other. The former stepped forward, took out the land deed, and looked at it carefully. It was a house, which was what they needed most now. They were still worrying about the house these days, but unexpectedly Suleun sent a house. Qin Jiu bit her lower lip and handed over the land deed hesitantly. Miss Su, we can't take such a valuable thing. Of course I didn't give it to you for free. Suleun's face darkened slightly. This change made Qin Jiu and Zhou Mingsheng nervous. Young Master Zhou is now the #1 scholar, and I think he will be able to enter the Hanlin Academy. In the past, I might have asked young Master Zhou for help. Suleun's words were completely undisguised, which actually made Qin Jiu and Zhou Mingsheng breathe a sigh of relief. Being more direct is better than hiding it. Zhou Mingsheng held up his hands and said, "Msu's help to Zhou, I don't dare to forget it. If there is anything needed, Miss Su can just ask, but..." He hesitated for a moment and then continued, "Zhou is just a scholar after all. There are definitely some things that he cannot help with. Don't worry, Mr. Zhou, nothing will embarrass you." In this way, Qin Jiu and Zhou Mingsheng accepted Suleun's gift. After sending Suleun to the entrance of the courtyard, Qin Jiu said, "Miss Su, do you want to attend the number 1 scholar banquet in 3 days? There will be too many people there, but I won't be able to go." Suleun shook his head. Qin Jiu did not persuade him, and he knew what Suleun meant. Suleun's coming today was beyond her expectation. On the way back, we passed by Li Mansion. As expected, there were many people outside Li Rui's house, many of whom were carrying medicine boxes. It seemed that they were all doctors who came to consult Li Rui. Kuai glanced outside and then at Suleun's expression, which seemed to be struggling with something. "You can just say whatever you want." Suleun was a little funny and gestured. Lian Xian glanced at Kuilu with disapproval, but Kuilu was someone who couldn't hide. "How could she bear it, miss? Aren't you curious about Mr. Li's situation?" "Are you curious?" Suleun was indeed curious. What Li Rui encountered was completely different from his previous life. How could she not be curious? Kuai rolled her eyes, approached Suleun, and whispered, "I just heard some strange things." "What's weird?" "Miss, these are just random things, so you don't need to pay attention to them." Seeing that Kuai was getting more and more biased, Lian Xian opened her mouth to stop her. This actually made Suleun more curious. With Suleun's consent, Kuai told everything she heard. Li Mansion is really not peaceful during this time. First, Mrs. Li suddenly fell ill in bed, then Mr. Li broke his leg, and Mrs. Li cut her cheek. Then, Li Minmin was actually seen naked, and now she is talking about marriage. Now, Li Rui suddenly fell into coma. Many people learned about these things and expressed that the Li family had provoked something dirty. Suleun frowned. As for the theory of ghosts and gods, if she had not been reborn, she would naturally not believe it. But after rebirth, I vaguely believed it again, but the situation like this in the Li family was really a bit too weird. After thinking for a while, Suleun said, "We won't go back now. We'll go to the moon tower instead." Kuilu and Lian Xian were a little puzzled. When we arrived at the moon tower, a carriage was already parked outside the building. Suleun took Kuai and Liangzin into the building, and a black shadow stopped them. "We are not entertaining today, please come back." "Why?" Suleun looked at Black Eagle's dark face, and just as he asked, he added, "Since it's inconvenient today, I'll come back tomorrow." She was about to leave when she heard the sound of the flowing wind. "Miss Su." Black Eagle was shocked. The person he stopped was actually the Miss Su that His Highness was talking about. But this Miss Su doesn't look like she came back from Jingzhou at all. Seeing Lai Yufeng, Suleun realized that Xiao Shenjiao was also there. "I think you have something important to do, so I'd better leave first. If you don't have anything to do, please ask Miss Su." Lai Yufeng stepped forward and signaled. Suleun looked at Shang Lai Yufeng and realized that she had only been in for a while, and she didn't know how Xiao Shenjiao knew about it. However, since he wants to see himself, there is nothing wrong with him. Kuai and Lian Xian were stopped downstairs. Suleun walked up the stairs to the second floor and walked toward the back of the house. Suleun raised his hand and knocked on the door, and Xiao Shenjiao's distinctive cold voice sounded. "Come in." She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. In the room, Xiao Shenjiao was sitting on the main seat, with Elder Wuxin and a masked man standing on both sides. The candle light was very bright, and Suleun could easily see the mask worn by the masked man. Her face turned pale instantly, she was shocked, and she couldn't help but take a few steps back. Her expression was very frightened. The masked man's eyes flashed with a dark light of unknown meaning, but there was no movement. Xiao Shenjiao frowned slightly. Had Suleun seen the shadow? Sorry, I lost my composure for a moment. Suleun bit his lower lip and finally calmed himself down. She never expected that she would meet the masked man so suddenly. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 265. Chapter 265 The Grace of Life. Suleun narrowed his eyes and walked into the house. I'm here to see Elder Wuxin. Elder Wuxin glanced at Xiao Shenjiao and saw that his master had no displeased reaction, so he stepped forward and asked, "What's the matter with Miss Su?" "About the Li family, I would like to ask Elder Wuxin." Suleun hesitated, and the atmosphere around him was a bit solemn. If His Highness and Elder Wuxin still have something to discuss, I'd better wait until next time. Suleun couldn't help but want to leave because he felt it was a little weird to be here. Strictly speaking, she did not have many opportunities to interact with these royal children in her previous life. Firstly, the Su family disliked her for being embarrassed and did not allow her to show up often. Secondly, she married Li Rui in just a year or two. It is deep in a residential courtyard and rarely exposed. But he didn't expect that in his next life, he would have something to do with King Jin. Xiao Shenjiao's eyes passed over Suleun, knowing that she felt uncomfortable. After a moment, he stood up and said, "I'll be here first today." "Yes." Elder Wuxin and Ying should arrive at the same time. The shadow quickly disappeared into the room. Xiao Shenjiao took a step forward, walked past Suleun, and left the room. There are only two elders, Su Li and Wu Xian. Ms. Su, you must have heard about the situation of the Li family. Wu Wei also wrote to me about the specific situation, and it's all here. Elder Wuxin took out a letter from his arms and handed it to Suleun. The above are records about some situations of the Li family. The Taoist priest who went to Li's house was arranged by Suleun. Suleun can feel more at ease by letting Su Weiner and Li Rui get married as soon as possible. After all, what she knew in her previous life has been stopped. If Su Weiner gets entangled with Prince Yu, she is not sure whether there will be more conspiracies against her. Come. She didn't want to put too much thought into Su Weiner before completely protecting the Sun family. The letter wrote about Li Rui's dementia. Sure enough, an accident happened that day at the village. It is credible, but he wrote something. Suleun's eyes gradually dimmed. Li Rui went to Lanjiao Temple to look for Su Weiner, but more things could no longer be found. She couldn't help but think of Granny Lan. Grandma Lan once provided Su Weiner with a lot of medicines. Is Li Rui's stupidity related to Granny Lan? And now that Li Rui has fallen into a coma, is it possible that Granny Lan and Su Weiner are also involved in this? As for the recent events in the Li family, Su Weiner's hands and feet are indispensable. Suleun put the letter away and said, "It's troublesome for Elder Wu Xian these days." "No trouble, Miss Su is a customer of Yulo. Yulo always pays the money and delivers the goods, so why bother?" Elder Wuxin's attitude is completely different from the first time they met. I think this has something to do with Xiao Shenjiao. After leaving the Moon Tower, the carriage was still parked by the door. Lai Yufeng stood by the carriage and saw Suleun coming out. He stepped forward and said, "Miss Su, Your Highness has something to tell you." He pointed at the carriage and gestured. Green Willow and Lotus Heart are standing not far away. Suleun only hesitated for a moment, then walked to the carriage under the gaze of several people. Lu Feng opened the curtain and helped Suleun into the carriage. "Your Highness." Suleun sat beside the car door, extremely far away from Xiao Shenjiao. There is only so much distance in the carriage. No matter how far away Sulayun sits, the distance between the two people is not much farther. What does Miss Su have to say about Prince Yu? Your Highness, civilian women don't know much. Sulayun seemed to have guessed what Xiao Shenjiao would ask, and looked up at him. Xiao Shenjiao looked slightly calm. Prince Yu is not as easy to deal with as you think. To be able to make King Jin say such words, Xiao Jin's ability is definitely not weak. But Sulayun thought of the dream he had before, and his tone became more serious. If King Jin has his heart, I think King Yu will not be your opponent. Do you know what you are talking about? Sulayun's words almost made his thoughts clear. Xiao Shenjiao's eyes darkened. How could a girl who came back from Jingzhou have such courage to say such treasonous words to him? Or, is there any difference between Xiao Jin and Sulayun? Your Highness is smarter than the daughter of the people, so why can't he guess the meaning of the daughter of the people? My brother and your Highness have been friends since childhood in the eyes of others. My brother and your Highness are tied to the same boat, so what will they think of the Sun family? Sulayun was not timid. She said these words with cruel intentions. She couldn't see through Xiao Shenjiao's thoughts on the throne, but since Xiao Shenjiao could ascend the throne in his previous life, why not in this life? Facing Sulayun's resolute gaze, Xiao Shenjiao's lips curled up for some unknown reason. If you don't like Xiao Jin, I will help you, so what's the problem? Your Highness. Sulayun was startled. She clearly didn't mean this. She hated Xiao Jin, but why did it sound weird when she said it from Xiao Shenjiao's mouth? Getting out of the carriage confused, Sulayun walked to Sun Mansion's carriage. By the time she got into the car, Xiao Shenjiao's carriage had already gone quite a distance. Zhao Chun Palace. Han Qingyuan stood by the pillar with closed eyes, quietly listening to the conversation between concubine Min and Prince Yu. As soon as Xiao Shenjiao comes back, your father's thoughts will be on him. He is also lucky. Xiao Jin took a sip of tea. His words were filled with chills, and his expression was even colder, completely different from usual. Only in concubine Min's palace could Xiao Jin take off the pretense and radiate his malice unceremoniously. He glanced at Han Qingyuan beside the pillar and asked, "Is this person useful?" "It's okay to use the people sent by your grandfather." Most likely, seeing Han Qingyuan would make concubine Min think of eunuch Luo, who had been with her for many years, so concubine Min didn't like to see Han Qingyuan. If he hadn't been arranged by his mother's family, she would have sent him away long ago. Eunuch Han. Xiao Jin calmed down and called Han Qingyuan. Han Qingyuan bowed his head and asked, "What are your orders, your Highness?" His voice is not as sharp as that of ordinary eunuchs, it is quite comfortable. Xiao Jin's eyes fluttered and he said after a while, "Have I seen you somewhere?" This slave dare not hide it. Han Qingyuan knelt down without hesitation. "Your Highness has given me a life-saving grace." Oh. Xiao Jin became a little curious. He just said it casually. Naturally, he didn't bother to remember what these slaves looked like. It's just that Han Qingyuan's appearance did look familiar to him, so he had this conversation. At Princess Annal's Plum Blossom banquet, if it hadn't been for His Highness's help, I would have died long ago. Plum Blossom banquet. Xiao Jin thought for a moment, and a face flashed in his mind. It is a bit more steadfast than plum blossoms. He looked at Han Qingyuan again, and now he remembered. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 266. Chapter 266 The Gold Medal to Avoid Death. It turns out that you are the slave who broke the flower pot that day. What a coincidence. Xiao Jin paused and then said, "I remember that you seemed to have stayed at Su's house for a few days." Exactly. Han Qingyuan lowered his head. looking very respectful, but there was no respect in his eyes. But Xiao Jin and concubine men could not see all this. Then you should be quite familiar with Miss Su Er. I don't dare to lie to you. I stayed in Su's house for a few days and didn't have much contact with Miss Su. Han Qingyuan was thinking. Xiao Jin seemed to be very curious about Suleun. Although he also felt that Suleun was a bit special, there were no such women. Why was Xiao Jin so curious about Suleun alone? Yet, Xiao Jin didn't really want to ask anything. Seeing Han Qingyuan's answer, he didn't continue to ask. After staying with concubine men for a while, Xiao Jin left Zhaochun Palace. Several titled princes have their own mansions outside the palace. As soon as he returned to the house, his concubine Shen Dan came. "Your Majesty, you are finally back. What's the matter with my beloved concubine?" Xiao Jin smiled and took concubine Shen into his arms, his eyes full of affection, which made concubine Shen blush. "Your Majesty, I have prepared the gifts for the Queen Mother's birthday. Do you want to go and have a look? With the help of my beloved concubine, I will naturally feel at ease." "Your Majesty." Concubine Shen leaned on Xiao Jin's arms, very shy. "I actually have something I want to ask for." "Oh, my dear, just tell me." Xiao Jin's eyes darkened a bit, but concubine Shen didn't see it. He also patted Xiao Jin's chest and whispered softly, "The prince also knows that I have a younger brother, and it's time to marry a wife. I thought that next month would also be my birthday, so I thought, what do you think of taking this opportunity to look for my younger brother? Shen Bin has also reached this age. Since my beloved concubine has an idea, how can I be willing to refuse?" Xiao Jin reached out and gently pinched concubine Shen's chin, raised her head, and kissed her. "But how can my beloved concubine repay this king? My lord, I hate it." Concubine Shen smiled coquettishly and moved her mouth obediently. The bed curtain fell, blocking the two intertwined figures. March 15th, the birthday of the Queen Mother. Whether it was inside or outside the palace, it was extremely lively. Even before Shen Shi, Sun's mansion was already busy. Suleun took a deep breath so that Lian Xian could tighten the belt. Seeing this scene, Grandma Zhang couldn't help but said, "Miss, I look at you, you have gained a lot of weight. Mommy, please stop teasing me." Suleun also knew that he had gained some weight. Perhaps he was in a good mood recently, and his appetite was also much better. But even though he is fat, he is not considered fat. It's good that the young lady can gain weight. The skinny appearance she had before returning to the capital made me feel distressed when I saw her. Mammy Zhang said with a smile, and stepped forward to help Lian Xian put on Suleun's clothes. In the bronze mirror, Suleun was wearing a dark blue skirt with a light color jacket on top. The lower part of the jacket is embroidered with light blue floral patterns, which makes it look more lively. The face that has been raised for almost half a year is now white and rosy, with willow eyebrows and almond-shaped eyes, and slightly red cheeks. There is no trace of the rustic tackiness of the past. Young lady looks like this. If she comes back from the Queen Mother's birthday party today, I'm afraid there will be more people coming to ask for her hand in marriage. Mama Zhang's eyes were full of kindness. She also watched Suleun coming over little by little, and she was full of sighs at this time. Before returning to Beijing, she was always worried that the young lady would be bullied. But when she came back, except for a few minor accidents, the young lady handled it well, and there was no need for Madame or her to worry. "Miss," the lady ordered the servant to come and said it was time to set off. The maid walked quickly and said, "Nu." Suleun responded softly. "Today is the birthday of the Queen Mother, and an envoy from the Gaoyu Kingdom is visiting. In order to avoid too many people and something goes wrong, the Emperor has already issued a decree that the lady is only allowed to bring one maid in." Suleun naturally did not hesitate and chose Lian Xian. Kuai also knew that she was not as attentive as Liang Xin, so she did not feel aggrieved. Instead, she asked Liang Xin to bring her some pastries from the palace. She had tasted them and treated them as if she had been there. "You're a good girl." Mammy Zhang nodded Kuliao's head and said helplessly, "Miss, don't listen to this girl." "Don't worry, Mom, I have my own plan." Sulayun comforted Nanny Zhang, but winked at Kuliao to express her agreement. When they arrived at the front hall, Sun Jiaro and Qin Zian had already packed up and were waiting. "Mom, my second aunt has kept you waiting for a long time." As for Sun Xiao and others, they had already set off for the palace. On the way to the palace, luxury carriages would pass by from time to time, all heading towards the palace. There were many carriages parked in front of the palace gate. Sulayun was the last one to get out of the car, and happened to meet Li Menjiao's hostile eyes. "That is the carriage of the Prime Minister's mansion." Li Menjiao was accompanied by an old woman. Although she was not tall, she was quite imposing. Mrs. Huo noticed Li Menjiao's actions and followed her. Then he coughed lightly and said, "Go in." "Yes, old lady." Hearing this, Li Menjiao quickly looked away and helped Mrs. Huo walk towards the palace. "I didn't expect Mrs. Huo to come too." Qin Zian sighed. Sun Jiaro and Qin Zian both knew Mrs. Huo. Among the older generation, Mrs. Huo's reputation was as good as anyone else. Even the Queen Mother had to show courtesy when she saw Mrs. Huo. Sulayun also heard about Mrs. Huo. He heard that Mrs. Huo and the late emperor were childhood sweethearts in their early years, and they waited until they reached adulthood to get married. However, he did not expect that Mrs. Huo was accidentally injured while trying to save the late emperor that year. As a result, he lost his memory and fell in love at first sight with the late emperor's friend, who is now Huo Laoxiangguo. During the period of amnesia, Mrs. Huo only had eyes for Mr. Huo Xiangguo, and the shadow of the late emperor was completely gone. At first, Huo Lao Xiangguo would still resist, but when a woman pursues a man, Huo Lao Xiangguo originally had some interest in Mrs. Huo, and as time went by, the relationship between the two became deeper and deeper. At this moment, Mrs. Huo regained her memory. Huo Lao Xiangguo was originally worried about whether Mrs. Huo would change her mind, but Mrs. Huo, who had recovered her memory, did not hesitate at all, expressed her feelings to the late emperor, turned around and married Huo Lao Xiangguo. Later, the late emperor succeeded to the throne, and the friendship between the three people remained deep. The former emperor granted the title of prime minister, and also made Mrs. Huo the royal wife. He also gave the Huo family a gold medal for immunity from death. To this day, the gold medal for immunity from death has not been used. The Huo family is still favored to this day. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 267. Chapter 267 The Envoy of Gaoyu Kingdom. Simply put, Mrs. Huo's life was inseparable from love. But it is clear that he is not trapped by love. Sulayun thought of this and had some respect for Mrs. Huo. Accompanying Sun Jiaro and Qin Zian to the palace, there were also many ladies and ladies from other provinces who were going with them. From time to time, someone cast their eyes on Sun Jiaro. This is the first time that Sun Jiaro, Su Changqing, and Li Ho have appeared in front of everyone, so it's no wonder that they attracted attention. Perhaps he was in the palace, and no matter how curious those people were, they didn't come forward to talk. The birthday of the Queen Mother is a happy event celebrated by the whole country. The banquet venue is arranged in Jiying Hall. Sulayun smelled a fresh fragrance after entering the palace. Looking around, the decoration in the palace looked simple but luxurious. It also highlights the background of the Dacian dynasty. The maid took them to their seats, poured them tea, and served them. Sulayun only raised his eyes and glanced half a circle before he saw the Sun family man surrounded by a crowd. "Old General Sun, when I look at you recently, it seems that your body and bones have become much sharper. Some people were looking at Sun Xiao's movements. In the past, due to rheumatism, Sun Xiao felt comfortable only in the summer. In other seasons, he would suffer from back pain or cramps in his hands and feet. Therefore, apart from going to the school training ground to train soldiers, he is rarely seen going out. Now when someone takes a look at it, they feel that Sun Xiao's face is not only rosy, but his body is also much straighter. Hearing this, Sun Xiao laughed loudly and patted his chest hard to prove his situation. Of course, my granddaughter specially prepared the medicine for me, and now I am much better. Hearing this, the man was stunned for a moment, and then thought about it again. I thought what Sun Xiao said was that his granddaughter got some good medicine and gave it to him. The man thought of the old man at home and couldn't help but said, "Old General Sun, I wonder where the medicine came from that has such an effect? You also know my father-in-law's condition. If there is such a good medicine, I would like to give it to him. My father-in-law can use it. This is feasible, but I have to ask my granddaughter." Sun Xiao was an old acquaintance of this man's father-in-law, and he also knew that his old friend also suffered from rheumatism, so he agreed first. "Then I'll thank General Sun first." On the other side, Suye was surrounded by many peers, who were either attentive or joking, and it was very lively. Sun Jiaro and Qin Zian saw an acquaintance and took Suleun up to say hello. While they were chatting, they heard the sharp voice of the eunuch. "The envoy from Jaya Kingdom has arrived." People in the palace stopped what they were doing and looked up at the palace door. A group of people dressed in foreign attire slowly walked into the hall. The man headed by him has thick eyebrows, big eyes, a straight waist, and an aura that cannot be underestimated. Among the people following him, there was a veiled woman in green clothes. Suleun glanced at the woman and made a guess in his mind. "I think she is the princess sent by Gaoyu Kingdom. The prince of Prince Pingzi and his daughter have arrived." "The prince of Prince Pingzi?" Suleun was slightly startled. He looked up and saw a familiar face. "Isn't that Sidhu Dankai?" Today she changed into women's clothes, and Suleun almost didn't recognize her at first glance. Sidhu Siu glanced at his sister who was following him. Sidhu Dankai was still fiddling with her dress, looking like she wanted to take off her clothes immediately. He spoke softly, rather helplessly, "Kikai, I know you are feeling uncomfortable, but tonight is the Queen Mother's birthday banquet, please bear with me any longer." "Brother, it's better if you come anyway, why do you need me to come too?" Sidhu Dankai let go of his hand, but he still knew that he was already in the palace. Sidhu Siu explained, "Both the Emperor and the Queen Mother already know about your coming to the capital. If you don't show up on the Queen Mother's birthday, how can you explain it to the Emperor and the Queen Mother?" "Nu." Sidhu Dankai looked away and met Suleun's eyes. Her eyes lit up, "Brother, I see someone I know. I'll go over first." Before Sidhu Siu could hold Sidhu Dankai back, she had already ran over. "Ms. Su, we meet again. The daughter of the people has seen the princess." "Oh, don't be so polite." Sidhu Dankai quickly grabbed Suleun and sat down next to Suleun. This scene fell into the eyes of everyone. Shortly after Sidhu Dankai and Sidhu Siu arrived, the Emperor and the Queen Mother also arrived. Concubine Qin also appeared with the 13th prince. As he walked towards the palace, the 13th prince saw Suleun, but was pulled by concubine Qin, so he smiled at Suleun. Emperor Jianwen looked at the Queen Mother beside him and said, "Mother, today is your birthday, why don't you say a few words?" Since the Emperor said so, Ijia will not refuse. The Queen Mother was helped up by the maid beside her and took a few steps forward. Everyone stood up. Now our great dynasty is getting more and more prosperous, and the AI family is quite proud to see it. Although today is the birthday of the AI family, it is also the joy of the whole country, so just relax your temper and have a good time. The Queen Mother is 1,000 years old. Everyone saluted one after another. The banquet has begun. There was singing and dancing, and the lights flickered. The woman in green jumped out from the crowd, her graceful figure attracted everyone's attention in an instant. The sound of the piano and the flute intertwined and echoed in the hall. The woman in green opened her water sleeves, and the fluttering water sleeves were full of strength under her hands. With the addition of drums, the woman in green softened her waist and slowly lowered her waist. At this moment, the veil shook and fell, revealing an elegant and beautiful face. The sound slowly faded away, and the dancers bowed and retreated. The woman in green stood up, walked quickly to the front of the hall, panted lightly and knelt down. Green, he has met His Majesty. You are Princess Green he of Jaya Kingdom, and this dance is truly worthy of your reputation. Emperor Jianwen nodded with satisfaction and waved to eunuch Wan. Reward. Father Wan faced everyone and shouted, Princess Green he. Green he thanks your majesty. Princess Green he was neither humble nor arrogant. The slave beside her accepted the reward from thee and returned to her seat with Princess Green he. Seeing Lu He sitting down, the envoy of Gao Yu Kingdom stood up from behind the table. Sir, An Yuchen has met your majesty. I am really happy that the second prince of Jaya Kingdom came here in person. Emperor Jianwen easily pointed out An Yuchen's identity, which attracted everyone's attention and started talking in private. I don't know what Gao Yuegyo had in mind when he asked a prince of a country to serve as an envoy. I have admired your majesty for a long time, and I have specially requested permission from my father to come here to wish the Queen Mother a happy birthday and long life. The Queen Mother nodded slightly and asked someone to bring the wine to An Yuchen. Emperor Jianwen saw that An Yuchen's attitude was decent and natural, and the suspicion in his eyes faded a bit. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, Past and Present. Chapter 268. Chapter 268 Clarification of Identity. In addition, my father also specially asked me to bring a batch of rare treasures to present to His Majesty. An Yuchen reached out and patted his ear. I saw a few slaves walking forward carrying a few boxes. The boxes fell to the ground and were opened one by one. There are 5 boxes in total, 3 of which contain some treasures and jewelry. There were only a few strange things in the remaining 2 boxes. An Yuchen stepped forward and took out a long cylindrical object from a box. He stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, this thing is called a kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope. Emperor Jianwen looked at the things in An Yuchen's hands. I saw An Yuchen demonstrate it, and then handed it to eunuch Wan so that Emperor Jianwen could see it. Eunuch Wan checked it carefully and made sure there was no danger before handing it over to Emperor Jianwen. Emperor Jianwen followed An Yuchen's demonstration and placed a kaleidoscope over his eyes. The next moment, Emperor Jianwen's face showed a little surprise, but it quickly disappeared. This kaleidoscope is indeed interesting, but it's novel, and it won't be interesting if you see it too much. Emperor Jianwen put down the kaleidoscope and looked back at An Yuchen. An Yuchen was not embarrassed and asked someone to take something out of the box. It is a coral sculpture with bright red color. Just looking at it with your eyes, the quality of jade is very warm. This is the work that I specially invited the most famous craftsman to polish in half a year, and dedicated it to His Majesty. What's so special about this jade? Emperor Jianwen heard that An Yuchen still had something to say, so he asked. An Yuchen replied, Your Majesty is right, this jade does have something special, but it still needs some conditions. He looked around and said, Your Majesty, please agree to extinguish the lights all around. Emperor Jianwen gave eunuch Wan a look, and the latter nodded and ordered people to put out the lights. In a few breaths, the candles were extinguished one by one. Only the coral jade sculpture next to An Yuchen actually emitted a glowing light. The exclamations one after another further prove the magic of jade carvings. Sulayun also looked surprised. It was really interesting that there was such a luminous jade. The candle was lit, and the surrounding light returned. This jade is really interesting. Beside him, Sidhu Dankai couldn't help but speak out, his words filled with surprise. The remaining items were not as novel as the jade, but they also opened the eyes of those present. I have also prepared a gift for the Queen Mother, but I need your Majesty and the Queen Mother's entourage to go outside the palace to view it. The curiosity of Emperor Jianwen and the Queen Mother had already been raised by An Yuchen, and upon seeing this, they did not refuse. All my dear friends, please come with me and have a look. Emperor Jianwen spoke, and the ministers naturally did not dare to refuse. The remaining ladies also followed and walked out of the hall together. Sulayun gathered up his coat and smelled a faint smell of gunpowder in his nose. She frowned slightly, but before she could figure it out, there was a loud noise in her ears. Everyone was shocked. The guards also jumped out one after another to protect Emperor Jianwen. Sulayun looked up at the sky. Colorful flowers bloomed in the sky. When no more flowers bloomed in the sky, everyone turned around and returned to the hall, but their faces could not hide their curiosity and interest. I heard this sound, it sounds very similar to firecrackers and gunpowder. Emperor Jianwen easily pointed out this principle. An Yuchen stepped forward and bowed, Your Majesty is right. This object is modified from firecrackers and is called fireworks. Fireworks is indeed a good name. Emperor Jianwen nodded clearly, waved his hand, and rewarded An Yuchen with many things. Several song and dance performances followed. Finally it was time for Mrs. Lin to give her birthday gift. Mrs. Lin stepped forward slowly, followed by several maids carrying a screen frame covered with red cloth. I would like to send a birthday gift to the Queen Mother. I wish the Queen Mother to be as blessed as the East Sea and live as long as the southern mountains. As Mrs. Lin's voice fell, the maid gradually took off the red cloth covering the shelf and revealed a huge embroidery in front of everyone. 100 birds facing the phoenix. The Queen Mother couldn't help but stand up, and with the help of the palace maid, she walked to the screen and admired it carefully. Okay, this picture of hundreds of birds paying homage to the phoenix looks like the real thing. Just as the Queen Mother finished speaking, several brightly colored birds flapped their wings and flew into the palace. Hovering in the air a few times, a few birds slowly landed on the screen. Just stopped on those particularly delicate and real flowers. Mrs. Lin's embroidery can actually attract birds, the Queen Mother sighed, your embroidery skills are getting more and more outstanding. Mrs. Lin quickly said, I don't dare to claim credit. This embroidery was not done by me. Oh, there is someone whose embroidery skills are better than yours. As she said that, the Queen Mother seemed to notice something. She walked around the screen and looked behind her, then showed a surprised look. Is this still a double-sided embroidery? The Queen Mother became more and more curious about who the artist was. Mrs. Lin glanced at Sulayun and saw that she had no intention of refusing, so she said, this picture of 100 birds facing the phoenix was actually sewn by Miss Sulayun and Miss Luchin. Luchin, her double-sided embroidery is indeed amazing, but who is this Miss Sulayun? The Queen Mother vaguely felt that she had heard of this name, but she did not recall it for a moment. Sulayun stood up and knelt down in front of the Queen Mother. The commoner girl Sulayun has met the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother is 1,000 years old. You are Sulayun. The Queen Mother looked at Sulayun and looked her up and down. It seems that the AI family has never seen you before. The daughter of the people came back from Jingzhou just a few years ago, and she only had the honor to see the face of the Queen Mother at the palace banquet during the New Year. You are the legitimate daughter of the Su family. You do look a lot like your mother. The Queen Mother reacted now and glanced across Xiao Shenjiao. Seeing that her grandson's eyes did not fall on Sulayun at all, she also guessed something in her heart. As her grandson, if she really didn't care, she shouldn't have behaved like this. The AI family is very satisfied with this embroidery. What reward do you want? Judging from this sentence, The Queen Mother was indeed very satisfied with the picture of birds facing the phoenix, and she even let Sulayun ask for rewards at will. Sun Gro's worried eyes fell on Sulayun. She was worried that Yunur would say something greedy. Sulayun was waiting for the Queen Mother's words, but he still became nervous. She took a deep breath and raised her eyes to look at the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother, a daughter of the people, should not be greedy, but a daughter of the people does have something to ask for. What's the matter? The Queen Mother's voice was a bit colder, as if she thought Sulayun was going to make some very excessive demands. The daughter of the people wants to ask the Queen Mother to testify for the daughter of the people, clarify her identity, and give her justice. Sulayun kowtowed heavily, and the sound echoed throughout the hall. As early as when Sulayun came forward, Su Changqing had a drum in his heart, always feeling that something bad would happen. Now it has been fulfilled. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 269. Chapter 269 Obtaining Tianzi. Su Changqing had just stood up halfway when he noticed the look in Mrsu's eyes. He pursed his lips and sat down obediently. Mrsu stared at Sulayun for a long time, with a haze in her eyes. The Queen Mother was thoughtful and said, "How do you say this?" "I would like to discuss this matter with the Queen Mother in private." Sulayun met the Queen Mother's appraising gaze with a tone that was neither humble nor overbearing. "Today is the Queen Mother's birthday. I wish the Queen Mother a happy smile and a happy family forever." "Okay, Ijia will agree to your request." The Queen Mother waved her hands and returned to her position. The atmosphere in the palace was slightly condensed, but it was quickly broken. "Is Prince Pingzi here?" Emperor Jianwen said something in Eunuch Wan's ear, and Eunuch Wan stepped forward and shouted. Sidu Xiu put down the wine glass in his hand and strode into the hall. "I, Sidu Xiu, see your majesty." "Your majesty, Sidu Dankai, your servant, is here to see you." Sidu Dankai also came out and knelt down with his brother. The Queen Mother caught a glimpse of Sidu Dankai's appearance and couldn't help but think of the woman who had been favored by the late emperor. Sidu Dankai was not like her mother, but more like that woman. Just as heroic. "How is King Pingzi doing lately?" "Your Majesty takes care of me, and my father is in good health." Emperor Jianwen said some pleasantries, rewarded Sidu Xiu and Sidu Dankai with some gifts, and let them go down. At the end of the banquet, Sulayun was helping Sun Gro out, and saw Linglong standing not far from the entrance of the palace. Linglong was obviously waiting for Sulayun. Seeing her coming out, I hurried forward to greet her. "Miss Su." Linglong bowed in a low voice. "Sulayun, the noble concubine wants to see me." "Exactly." Facing Sun Gro and Qin Xian's confused looks, Sulayun explained, "Mom, you go back first, I'll go to the Jade Fu Palace. Yu Fu Hall is the residence of concubine Qin." Sun Gro thought of what happened at the last palace banquet, took Sulayun's hand and said, "You should pay attention to yourself, this is in the palace after all." She couldn't stop Yunur from seeing concubine Qin. The only thing she could do was to let Yunur not worry about other things and just go ahead and do it. Sulayun smiled back, "My daughter knows." After saying that, Sulayun looked at Linglong and said, "Let's go." "Ms. Su, please." Walking towards the Jade Buddha Hall, the number of people gradually became less and less. Linglong seemed to be more relaxed. "Miss Su, you don't know how effective the medicine and acupuncture you left are. Now the 13th prince running and jumping is no longer a problem. That's naturally a good thing." Sulayun is not proud of this. Strictly speaking, the prescriptions and acupuncture methods belong to the master and were not created by her. Walking all the way to the Jade Buddha Hall, Linglong talked about a lot of things. Now she is serving in the 13th prince's house, and her treatment is much better than before. She would also like to thank Sulayun for all this. If Sulayun hadn't saved the 13th prince and cured the 13th prince's asthma a lot, she wouldn't have been taken seriously. You can be appreciated because of your own efforts, not to mention that you did really well in those few days. Sulayun smiled and waved her hands, but Linglong still insisted that it was her credit. When she saw the Jade Buddha hall, Linglong silently closed her mouth and led Sulayun in. "Mother, Miss Su is here." Linglong stepped forward and knocked on the door, and soon Li Yulai came and opened the door. "Ms. Su, please." Li Yulai took Sulayun into the house, while Linglong closed the door, then turned and left. The hall is brightly lit and there is a faint fragrance. Sulayun lowered his head and bowed to concubine Qin. "A commoner's daughter has seen the concubine Qin." "Miss Su, please get up, you don't have to be so polite." Sulayun couldn't help but frown when concubine Qin's voice came. She felt that concubine Qin's voice was a bit strange. Just as she was thinking about it, she heard concubine Qin cough and said, "Give Miss Su a seat." Sulayun stood up and sat down, and couldn't help but raise his eyes to look at concubine Qin. However, concubine Qin's face was covered with makeup, and it was night and under the candle light, so she couldn't see clearly. "Ms. Su said before that if we can get Tianzi, there will be a way to completely cure Linner's asthma, but is it true?" "Back to the Empress, that's right." Sulayun was thinking, could it be that concubine Qin found Tianzi? To know this thing, even Master has only seen it once. Concubine Qin coughed again, and Yudi walked out of the darkness holding a jade box and handed it to Sulayun. "Tianzi must be placed in a jade box to preserve it?" Sulayun understood when he saw the jade box, but he was still a little nervous as he watched Yudi open the jade box. Inside lay a branch as big as a baby's forearm. "Mother, Layun, can you check it out?" "The person who sent it said not to touch it directly with your hands." Concubine Qin reminded her, then she covered her mouth with her handkerchief and coughed. "Tianzi is kept in a jade box, so naturally it cannot be touched at will." Sulayun asked someone to take a pair of jade chopsticks and scald one side with hot water. Then he used the jade chopsticks to fiddle with the heavenly branches in the jade box. After checking it carefully, Sulayun put down his jade chopsticks and said, "Madam, it is indeed Tianzi, and it is still quite old, much older than 50 years. Concubine Qin looked delighted. "Is this effect better?" "That's not what the Empress thinks." Sulayun shook his head. "The older the Tianzi is, the better it is. It depends on the twigs growing on it. The more twigs it has, the better. But the 13th prince for asthma, you only need more than 50 years of Tianzi, and you don't need to care how many Zaya you have." "When can it be cured?" Concubine Qin asked further. Sulayun nodded slightly and said, "We can only tell the Empress after the daughter of the people has seen the situation of the 13th prince." "Okay, Li Yulai, take Miss Su to meet the 13th prince." "Yes, Empress." Li Yulai stepped forward to take Sulayun away. Sulayun heard concubine Qin's cough again when she turned around. She couldn't hold it back anymore and looked at concubine Qin. "Have you had difficulty falling asleep at night recently, and can't get up in the morning? Your feet are cold and you have no appetite. How did you tell?" Concubine Qin was a little surprised. She didn't expect Sulayun's medical skills to be so good. "You can tell her condition without seeing a doctor." Sulayun frowned and said, "Madam, can you let the daughter-in-law check your pulse? Come forward." Sulayun stepped forward and put his hand on concubine Qin's wrist. The complexion gradually becomes ugly. It took a while to check the pulse, but concubine Qin also became nervous when she saw Sulayun's expression. "When did you start coughing?" Sulayun asked. Concubine Qin didn't remember much. Seeing this, Li Yulai hurriedly replied, "It was about 5 days ago. I still remember that day happened to be the day Tianzi was delivered." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 270. Chapter 270 Uncertain Poison. I have some impressions. When mentioning Tianzi, concubine Qin also remembered it. From the moment she learned that Tianzi was in her possession, concubine Qin could not let go. Therefore, on the day Tianzi was sent to Yufa Palace, concubine Qin personally took over Tianzi and inspected it carefully. Concubine Qin stared at Suleun's solemn expression, and her tone became a little darker. "Miss Su, if you have anything to say, just tell me. Judging from your current symptoms, madam, I can't draw any conclusions yet, but if I wait until it is confirmed, it will be too late for me to worry." Suleun's expression became more and more nervous, and concubine Qin also raised her heart and stared at her closely. "My dear, you seem to be poisoned." Poisoned? Concubine Qin's face changed drastically, but she quickly realized the meaning of Suleun's words. "Why does it seem like? Poisoning is poisoning, there is nothing that seems not to be the case." Suleun thought for a while and explained, "The folk girl has only heard about this poison, but has never seen it, so she is not sure." "Then how do you know that I am poisoned and not for other reasons?" Concubine Qin still had some trust in Suleun, and did not become angry because of her words. On the contrary, he had the patience to ask one more question. "It's my mother's voice that's not right." Suleun pointed to the incense burner in the corner. "I remember that the last time I came here, I didn't use this kind of incense. The fragrance in the palace was not strong, and I could still vaguely smell the smell of the incense from before, so the girl remembered. I guess this incense must have been changed by the Empress in the past few days." Concubine Qin didn't pay much attention to the incense in the palace, but she still remembered that she ordered someone to change the incense a few days ago. The previous fragrance was liked by Emperor Jianwen, and she had been using it for a long time, so she was used to it, but she suddenly felt bored for some reason, so she asked Li Yulai to change it. And she still remembered that she had to choose several kinds of incense before choosing one that was comfortable. Normally, she wouldn't pay too much attention to these. It was indeed changed in the past few days. Concubine Qin believed Suleun's words more. Suleun then pointed to the teacup next to concubine Qin. "My queen has also replaced the tea leaves, which have a strong bitter taste." Bitter taste? Concubine Qin was startled. She was most afraid of suffering. Thinking of this, she picked up the teacup and took a sip, but there was no bitter feeling. Li Yulai spoke worriedly, "My lady, you always say that tea has no taste these days. The slaves have changed several kinds of tea, but you only drink this one. But you never drink this tea on weekdays. For drink." When concubine Qin heard this, she broke out in a cold sweat. "Liyun, is this palace really poisoned?" The folk girl still said the same thing, "Not sure." Suleun lowered his head and returned. "Then how can you be sure? It takes 3 days for the daughter of the people. I give you time, what are you going to do?" Concubine Qin was certainly anxious when it came to her own body. Suleun said word by word, "People's daughters need to stimulate the poison in the Empress's body. This poison is said to be a poison, but in fact it is more like a poison. It will take root deeply in concubine Qin's body, eroding her internal organs bit by bit. But in the eyes of outsiders, it is just that concubine Qin is getting weaker and weaker, and no reason can be found. If she hadn't read a lot of medical books recently, she probably wouldn't have discovered it. Can you guarantee that nothing will happen to me because of this?" Concubine Qin's face was gloomy, and she stared at Suleun. Her intimidation from having been in a high position for a long time emerged. Suleun slowly knelt down and said, "If something happens to the Empress, the daughter of the people is willing to pay with her life. What if something happens to me and my life is taken?" Concubine Qin just wanted a promise. She waved her hand, "Then I will do as you say." If you need anything, tell Li Yulai and the others. The daughter of the people needs to go home to pick up some things, so I don't have to worry about it. The poison has not had a big impact on me yet. Concubine Qin nodded and asked someone to get a palace card. With this palace card, it will be convenient for you to enter and exit the palace, but I also want to remind you not to walk around at will. Thank you, madam, for the tip. Li Yulai first took Sulayun to the 13th prince's palace and made a diagnosis for the 13th prince. The 13th prince's condition is not bad. I will be able to diagnose and treat the 13th prince after the empress matter is settled. Sulayun told Li Yulai and asked her to take it to concubine Qin. Linglong once again sent Sulayun out of the Jade Fu palace, and maid stopped at the entrance of the palace to send Sulayun out of the palace. Outside the palace gate, Sulayun raised her eyes and saw her brother Suye holding the reins and waiting for her. Elder brother. Sulayun stepped forward and followed his brother. When you opened your mouth today, you really shocked me. Suye did not ask why Sulayun came out so late, but just mentioned what she said in front of the Queen Mother. Sulayun pursed his lips and smiled. Grandpa knows about this. I can see that when you spoke, my grandfather's expression was still smiling. Suye shook his head helplessly. You just hid it from us. If I tell my mother, I'm afraid she will talk about it again. That's true. Suye nodded in agreement, but mom is also worried about you, but in this matter, you are really too courageous. If something like this happens next time, just let me do it. Sulayun looked at Suye and said this. There was no hesitation on Suye's face, and there was even a bit of eagerness to try. Brother, are you worried about me, or do you think this kind of thing is quite interesting? Sulayun joked. Suye coughed lightly and said, of course I'm worried about you. If it weren't for your good drawing of the picture of hundreds of birds facing the phoenix, I'm afraid the Queen Mother would be angry if you said these words today. The Queen Mother will not do it. Sulayun shook his head, extremely confident. Suye looked at Sulayun doubtfully. You haven't even had contact with the Queen Mother, how can you be so sure? Sulayun smiled but said nothing. Why sure? There is a reason, of course. The Queen Mother has always been kind-hearted, but when she was young, she also encountered blood confusion, so she was quite dissatisfied with this kind of thing. If such a thing happened among the royal family or ministers, she would investigate it. However, not many people know about this kind of thing. She also learned about it accidentally in her previous life. In the previous life, several princes fought fiercely for the throne. So much so that it was involved in a royal scandal. That royal scandal caused a huge stir, but in the end it was the Queen Mother who came out and settled the matter vigorously and resolutely. It was also like this that Sulayun dared to speak on his birthday. Of course, the most important thing is the picture of hundreds of birds facing the phoenix. If the Queen Mother was not moved by this embroidery, she would never open her mouth and cause trouble for herself. Okay, it's getting late, let's go back early. Sulayun was helped onto the horse by Suye. Suye was quick on his feet and drove the horse towards the Sun Mansion. End of this chapter.